Millionaire family laughed at Waitress, but her mic reveal left them incredibly transformed. Annie stood at the counter of the diner, her uniform a stark reminder of the dreams she buried in the trenches of motherhood and endless bills. The daily diners had come to know her warmth and resilience, the weary smile she wore like armor. But beneath it all lay an ocean of longing, an ache for something different, something more. Today, that ache morphed into anxiety as she spotted the McAllister family gliding through the door, their air thick with arrogance. Their laughter pierced through the familiarity of the diner, a laugh that seemed not just to mock her worn sneakers, but to challenge the very essence of her being. As they settled into a corner booth, she felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Did they recognize the sacrifices she made while they sipped their lattes, oblivious to the struggles threadbare in her life? She had faced sleepless nights, balancing shifts and meal plans built around sale items. Yet here they were, a portrait of privilege, and she was just the waitress. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured their coffee, flashing her practiced smile while her insides churned. What was wrong with her? Why couldn't she just accept her role? Before she could spiral further, they announced they'd booked the diner for their grand charity gala. The words hung heavily in the air. Did they even realize this was her world? Just a waitress, they thought, dismissing the fire within her. It wouldn't matter to them if she stumbled, if she fell apart. But inside, conflict simmered, rising in her throat. Could she step into the spotlight, reclaim her past, and wield her voice? Or would she always be bound by the chains of her current reality? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. The night of the gala arrived, and Annie stood backstage, the stage lights bleeding through the heavy curtain. Her heart thundered with each breath as she clutched the microphone. It felt like holding a lifeline, and also a boulder. What would they think of her? What if she froze? While she rehearsed in her mind, self-doubt gnawed at her, telling her to turn back. Maybe it's not worth it. They'll never see me as anything beyond a waitress, a means to an end. But beneath that doubt lay another voice simmering with anger. This opportunity was hers, and she would not let it slip through her fingers.
She stepped onto the stage, the din of chatter waning into silence as all eyes fell on her. You could cut the tension with a knife. A cacophony of thoughts rushed through her, fear grappling with determination. She opened her mouth, and instead of retreating into herself, she unleashed years of unexpressed longing. Each note flowed as she poured her heart, and faces once skewed with judgment around the room transformed. But just as the applause erupted, a flash of vulnerability surged through her. Would the respect she earned tonight diminish with their next laugh, the next casual dismissal? The internal tug-of-war left her breathless, wondering if this crescendo of empowerment could withstand the crush of their privilege. As she stepped off stage, Annie's heart raced. The uncertainty loomed. Would they finally understand her, or would the weight of their entitlement snuff out this newfound light? The tension hung heavy as she faced the truth. This journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The gala buzzed with an intoxicating mix of admiration and disbelief, every face radiating a different shade of apprehension. As Annie stepped down from the stage, the applause still ringing in her ears, she fought to suppress the swell of emotions threatening to drown her. With every step, self-doubt clawed at her ankles like the very shadows she had just cast aside. Had she really made an impression, or was the audience simply indulging in some momentary muse? Her mind raced as she crossed the room, navigating the sea of silk and taffeta, luxury draped over everything and everyone. They smiled, but with what sincerity? The McAllisters congregated toward the center, basking in the glory of the evening, their laughter once again grating against her resolve. Annie's heart skipped. What if they returned to their condescending roots? What if this moment of vulnerability had been wasted on those too blind to see her worth? Annie found herself drifting toward the table, an inexplicable pull urging her forward. She slid into a chair near the edge, just close enough to hear the faint whisper swirling around her. They didn't see her. They saw the shimmer and the allure of their privilege. Yet her chest felt ignited. The spotlight she had claimed was more intoxicating than she had dared to imagine. "I can't believe she actually sang," one of the McAllister daughters, Lexi, scoffed, tossing her blonde hair back, a flicker of derision in her eyes. Honestly, did she think anyone would take her seriously? Annie felt the sharp stab of their judgment. Each comment ignited a firestorm within her. She was more than just a waitress. She was a mother, a survivor, and now, perhaps, an artist. But who would believe it? Did they even want to know her story? Deep breath. She couldn't let resentment fit neatly into her soul. Instead, she decided it was time to confront their ignorance. She needed to reclaim her narrative.
Standing up, she poised herself, catching the attention of nearby guests, but most importantly, the McAllisters. "Excuse me," her voice cut through the contempt like a warm knife through butter. Lexi's mouth dropped, surprise briefly gracing her features. "Just because I waited on tables doesn't mean I don't deserve your respect. You may not see me in the same light I see myself, but that doesn't change my worth." The atmosphere shifted. Whispers flitted at the edge of the room, punctuated by the rhythm of her resolute heartbeat. Around her, guests turned to face the McAllisters with a curious tension. Would they rally behind her? Would they dismiss her in laughter again? "Your family has this illusion of superiority, but I'm here to destroy it," she pressed on. "I'm so much more than your past assumptions. My life hasn't defined me. I've defined my life. Maybe it's time you see that too?" What if this was the moment she would finally disrupt the narrative? For every haughty laugh or dismissive chuckle, she had found a response, an opportunity she could build upon, a foundation to grow on, and she refused to build a bridge back to their laughter. As the last words settled in the air, silence danced around her, thick with their disbelief. Anxiety twisted in Annie's chest, but within it stirred a bubbling anticipation. She had done more than elevate her voice. She had signaled the beginning of a confrontation that would redefine her destiny. But could she sustain this? Or would the McAllisters wield their privilege to suffocate her flame? The uncertainty crackled in the air like static, and as she glanced around the room, she realized the stakes had shifted permanently. She was no longer playing a role. She was on the precipice of carving out her identity. As she tasted the exhilaration of boldness, the weight of her next steps loomed over her. Would she risk everything to challenge their perceptions, or would this moment cascade into a reality where she could lose it all? The crowd's reaction felt like a tidal wave, ready to crash. In that instant, one question resonated deeply within her. Just how far was she willing to go to redefine herself? A charged silence enveloped the room as Annie stood her ground, the gravity of her words hanging in the air. The McAllisters seemed momentarily paralyzed, their expressions a tangled blend of shock and defensiveness. Every second stretched, the applause from her performance feeling distant, as if she were encased in a bubble filled only with her heartbeat and the murmurs of the crowd. It was a new reality. She'd thrown open the door to possibility, but would she step through it? With a deliberate breath, Annie abandoned her instinct to flee. She could feel the weight of their gazes on her, a mix of surprise, pity, and for a fraction of a second, something akin to respect. In that moment, she recognized her strength. This was not merely about the McAllisters. This was about anyone who had ever underestimated her. Emboldened, she spoke again. "Every one of you has your own story, just like I do. We all lie on different points of the spectrum, but my journey has made me resilient, capable of confronting adversity. You want to define me? Let me show you who I truly am." This time, silence filled the room. Their expression shifted, and Annie realized the power she wielded. That realization lit a fire within her, a newfound determination to embrace every hard-fought lesson life had offered. But the moment was fragile. Would they lean into understanding and let her redefine herself in their eyes? Or would their privileged upbringing paint her as inconsequential again? She braced herself for the backlash, mentally cycling through the possibilities. Lexi regained her composure first, her voice sharp. "And what makes you think anyone wants to hear more of your soulful reflections?" The disdain dripped from her words like venom. It was a familiar attack, one Annie had encountered before, yet this time felt different. She was grounded, ready to dig deeper. "I think it's time that everyone hears the music we all play, the sounds of struggle,
the melodies of triumph. Those are the notes that shape us. She surprised herself with her eloquence, the truth of her experiences weaved into every syllable. Around her, conversations flickered to life again, guests exchanging glances, weighing her perspective against their previous assumptions. Annie could sense the tide turning, not because of her desire for acceptance, but because she refused to back down. They saw her. The vulnerable side of her was on display, yet so was her resolve. As her courage flared, she strategized her next moves. She understood that breaking through layers of ingrained prejudice would be a long game. It would require consistency and unwavering belief. She couldn't promise a regular supply of her revelations each day, nor could she expect them to change overnight. Yet she could gradually chip away at their perceptions, one conversation at a time. The buzz of whispered opinions teetered on the verge of rebellion and curiosity. Annie felt the weight of possibility resting on her. Did she pursue the challenge of gathering like-minded supporters, or focus on an individual approach, inviting one person at a time to see her for who she really was? Lexi's laughter was quiet but dismissive, yet surrounded by receptive faces, it began to lose its power. The crowd's collective gaze shifted toward Annie, with a hint of newfound admiration. It was a small but significant victory, the thrill of which coursed through her. She took a deep breath and replied, "I'm not just a singular note in someone else's composition. I am the symphony of my own life." And as she turned her gaze to others at the table, she saw glimmers of intrigue in their eyes, a small spark ignited by her unexpected declaration.
With each passing moment, the realization crept in that she was not merely fighting for respect, she was sparking a transformation, not just within herself, but in others around her. The McAllisters were not her adversaries, they were a stepping stone towards something greater. But as the revelations flooded her senses, doubts lingered just beneath. How would she navigate their inevitable backlash? What strategies would she employ to ensure that this single performance wasn't just a fleeting moment of bravery? Her heart raced with anticipation as she pondered her next steps. Annie's journey was only beginning, and she felt the intricate threads of her narrative weaving together beautifully. Yet, as she scanned the crowd, one question lingered. How much invincibility would she need to face the backlash poised to come from those who thrived on the very privilege she sought to challenge? The moment to redefine her existence had arrived, but it came with a tightrope of uncertainty that made her pulse quicken. Annie stood amid the shifting tides of energy, the weight of the moment still crackling in the air. Her heart raced, but she was not paralyzed by fear. Rather, she felt invigorated by the possibility of change. Around her, the guests murmured amongst themselves, reactions sprouting like wildflowers. Some bloomed in curiosity, while others withered with skepticism. She seized the opportunity to solidify her presence in this new reality. What had begun as a desperate plea for recognition was transforming into a clarion call for authenticity. As she engaged the crowd's attention once more, she calculated her next words. Each syllable needed to be both a shield against scorn and a beacon of empowerment. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "We've all faced moments of doubt. I've had mine, but every time that doubt echoed, I found strength to challenge it." A few heads nodded in tentative agreement, and Annie felt that familiar rush of courage. She tapped into her own story, the struggles, the late nights, the fears, and wove it into a tapestry of resilience. Lexi's derisive chuckle still hung in the air. "And what? You think that will make us feel sorry for you?" The challenge wasn't merely verbal, it felt physical as well, a gauntlet thrown at her feet. Annie could sense the collective anticipation, an odd blend of pity and intrigue, and she decided not to shy away any longer. "I don't need your pity, Lexi. I'm simply asking you to see me for who I am. We often overlook the narratives that don't fit our perceptions, especially in a world that favors the polished and the privileged." Annie's words landed like a pebble thrown into a lake, the ripples echoing within the crowd. The room shifted again, the once uncomfortable silence giving way to a new kind of dialogue. Annie felt an electric pulse of energy flowing through her, igniting the potential for genuine connection. Were they ready to shed their preconceived notions?
Would they entertain the possibility that she was more than their assumptions? Annie understood one essential truth. She could not confront ignorance solely with declarations. She had to invite discourse, to draw them into her world without being overbearing. I invite you all to share your stories with me. What makes you who you are? I want to understand just as much as I want to be understood. Several audience members exchanged glances. The hesitations now mingled with curiosity. While she couldn't predict their next moves, a flicker of hope danced within her. She would craft her path step by step, conversation by conversation. Annie decided to approach this moment with both diplomacy and tenacity. Yet, nestled beneath this newfound determination was an unsettling thought. As the seconds ticked by, what if her efforts were dismissed? The question gnawed at her. She needed to build her strategy carefully, choosing her allies wisely. She glanced toward the edge of the room, where a young man appeared captivated by her words. There could be potential there. Maybe he represented a bridge to others who were willing to listen. Her mind danced with possibilities as they exchanged glances. She felt an urge to reach out, but would he truly align with her vision? Everything felt urgent, yet Annie understood the necessity of patience in her pursuit. Each moment was a calculated move in this rapidly evolving chess game. As she stood at the precipice of potential change, the lingering question remained. How could she ensure that one meaningful interaction blossomed into a cascade of understanding across a room steeped in privilege? Each smile, each enigma remained a puzzle to decode. And amid the dancing tension, the fabric of her journey continued to weave itself. Before she could resolve her thoughts any further, Lexi stepped back into the fray, her eyes narrowing. You think this is a moment of transformation. You're not as special as you think, Annie. The gauntlet had been thrown once more, but this time, Annie was ready. The moment of truth was closing in. Would she rise to meet Lexi's challenge and redefine the narrative, or would the old expectations trap her once more? Annie squared her shoulders, the tension in the air lashing at her resolve. Lexi's taunt simmered like a flame ready to ignite a broader confrontation. As the room hushed, the weight of their gazes resting heavily upon her, Annie felt the faint tremors of vulnerability attempt to creep in. Yet this was precisely the moment she had been preparing for, the rationale behind her efforts crystallizing. Maybe I'm not special by your standards, she said, choosing her words thoughtfully. But each of you knows the difference between pretending and being authentic. What makes you special is not wealth or status. It's our stories, the moments that shape us in silence. With each syllable, she felt the shackles of self-doubt loosen their grip.
It was no longer merely about her journey. It had transformed into an opportunity for them all to reflect on their apprehensions, their truths. She dared them to question, to peel back their own layers in this vulnerable space she had created. A flicker of acknowledgement crossed the room. The young man she had noticed earlier leaned forward, eyebrows arched in curiosity. It was a small crack in the facade of indifference, but it was enough. Annie pressed on, intensifying the pulse of connection. I want to know your fears, too. Aren't we all just searching for validation in a world that measures our worth by superficial scales? A silence followed, heavy yet promising. Annie could feel the tide turning, a rhythmic dance of apprehension and intrigue. Her mind raced as she considered her next move. Would she lose ground if she pressed harder, or could she sustain this momentum? Each moment felt crucial, brimming with potential for growth, to not only transform herself, but also spark a deeper understanding in them. The atmosphere shifted, and Annie saw a group of people flanking Lexi begin to murmur among themselves, their expressions no longer dismissive. What if you're not just another waitress? One voice piped up, barely above a whisper. What if you're something more? Annie's heart surged. She seized the opening, her voice strong and clear. Exactly. I want to be more than what you see. Aren't we all capable of breaking free from our labels? It's time to peel back the layers that we've hidden behind. Time to start conversations that matter. As she held their gaze, she could sense them grappling with their own reflections, their defenses falling like walls in a siege. The young man nodded slowly, an unspoken agreement passing between them. The idea of transforming perspectives rippled through the crowd, each individual wrestling with the gravity of Annie's words. Then Lexi, caught off guard by the unexpected turn, glared at Annie. This isn't some therapy session. You think opening up will earn you respect? Her tone dripped with condescension, but Annie recognized the tremor in it, fear and confusion. Perhaps Lexi was more fragile than she let on.
I don't need anyone's respect, not if it's built on illusion, Annie countered. What I seek is understanding in its truest form, where the vulnerabilities are embraced. There's power in stories shared, in breaking the silence that isolates us. Suddenly, the dynamics shifted again. A murmur of reluctant agreement swept through. This time it felt charged, an awakening of sorts. Annie realized she couldn't simply rely on her own feelings of empowerment. She had to invite them to share theirs as well. Let's take a leap together. Who knows where it might lead us? The young man stepped forward, finally breaking the invisible barrier that separated him from her. His voice wavered at first, but as he spoke, it grew in strength. I've struggled too, but I've never dared to reveal it. Maybe it's time.
Annie's pulse quickened. Here was her chance, not only to reinforce her existence, but to create a ripple effect that might extend far beyond herself. Yet another doubt emerged as Lexi's icy glare remained fixed on her. Would they collectively challenge her authenticity, or would they risk defining themselves in solidarity to her cause? As the room hummed with burgeoning conversations and shared identities, Annie braced herself for what was to come. Would Lexi retaliate, or would she join this unexpected awakening? The moment hung like a pendulum, swaying in uncertainty. With the burgeoning realization that this could be a pivotal moment, Annie took a breath, ready to embrace whatever unfolded next, knowing the next step could redefine the course they were all on. Her heart raced at the thought. It was the push she needed. The veil of fear was being lifted. Would she choose to shatter expectations completely, or retreat back into the shadows? The question loomed before her, sharp and unyielding. Annie stood in the tension of the moment, uncertain yet resolute, as the young man's words ignited a flicker of acknowledgement among others. What had begun as a personal struggle felt like it was morphing into a collective exploration of identity. Yet Lexi remained a formidable specter, a matriarch of self-doubt willing to cast stones from her throne. Annie recognized that facing her critique was vital. Do you think sharing our truths is weakness? She asked Lexi, narrowing her focus, determined to engage her next. Vulnerability is often misunderstood. It takes strength to show the scars of our past. The energy in the room, orbs of uncertainty, collided with a burgeoning flame of courage. Lexi's brows furrowed. Annie could see her grappling with the unfolding pandemic. Doubt flickered across her features. With every heartbeat waking a courage within, Annie recognized this as her opportunity to confront not just Lexi, but her own lingering insecurities. Even you, Lexi, have your untold story, she pressed. Understand this. None of us are exempt from the weight of our past. The air thickened as the words hung palpably, each syllable inviting a deeper introspection. Lexi remained silent, a moment rolling past as if accepting the challenge Annie laid at her feet. Encouraged by her own audacity, Annie turned back to the group, drawing them in with a new thread of connection. I challenge each of you to share one truth today, one fear or experience that has shaped who you are. Let's acknowledge what's real. The response was thunderous in its hush. Heads turned to one another. Expression shifted. A combination of expectancy and dread swept through the gathering. Annie's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through her, as she witnessed them engaging in silent deliberation, eyes flitting between her and the others. A truth about myself? The young man repeated, the weight of the question evident in his voice. He crossed his arms, yet the tension in his body began to slacken, the burden of pretense crumbling. I have always felt overshadowed in my family, a failure in every regard, except for this facade of happiness. Annie felt a rush of solidarity bloom within her as she recognized the transformative power of shared vulnerability unfolding before her. You're not alone in that, she said, her voice soothing yet charged. We often wear smiles like armor. Who among us hasn't felt the sting of inadequacy? Another woman shifted in her seat, and before she realized, words tumbled from her lips. I've been afraid to pursue my passion for art. I've always been defined by my job, not my dreams. Each revelation echoed throughout the room, each member peeling back layers of authenticity in unexpected fashion. Annie turned to Lexi, who seemed caught in a battle with herself. This was a crucial confrontation, a moment to invite her to drop her shields. You don't have to join us if you're not ready, Lexi. Just know that this space is for you too, she offered, her sincerity extending like a lifeline. Slowly she observed as Lexi's features softened, the sharpness of her veneer beginning to crack. The flicker of humanity beneath exposed fragility, hinting that perhaps she too felt the undercurrents of fear and doubt. Are you truly saying it's okay to be vulnerable? Lexi's eyes started around,
the room's pulsating authenticity shaking the walls of her certainty. Annie took a breath, fueled by the collective moment. It's not just okay, it's liberating. We're all so much more than the personas we cling to. Choose connection over conflict. And with that, a floodgate opened. More voices chimed in, each carving pathways through the fog of uncertainty. The weight of shared experiences became tangible, weaving an intricate tapestry of collective healing. Annie saw the glow of liberation ignite their spirits, and she understood that in giving herself a voice, she had built a conduit for others to emerge from their shadows. The confrontation hadn't culminated into discord, but evolved into unexpected companionship. Yet, as Annie basked in this moment of catharsis, she felt the specter of self-doubt reemerge. Would she be able to continue carrying this emotional weight, or would she falter when faced with deeper truths? As conversations proliferated and connections deepened, Annie sensed that this awakening was merely the beginning. The very resilience she sought from others threatened to unravel in her own heart. What if she wasn't ready to face her own shadows? The question loomed, tracing pale fingers against the walls of her soul, demanding an answer as she prepared for what was next. Annie's chest tightened as the reflections of shared truths echoed in her mind.
The room had transformed. Voices that once hesitated now filled the air with tentative honesty, laying bare the fabric of individual lives. Yet the weight of her own unexamined truths sat heavy in her stomach. Her heart raced as Lexi's face softened imperceptibly. Could she truly be breaking through that impenetrable exterior? That doubt, which so often crept in uninvited, twisted a knot tighter in Annie's chest. Who was she to guide others when her own story remained unspoken, her scars still raw and untouched? The soft laughter and whispers wove an intricate pattern of connection, yet a singular thought spiraled in her mind. What if vulnerability was just a masquerade, a diversion from the significant, complex turmoil that lay within? She caught herself drifting, the noise around her fading into a low hum. "Annie?" The gentle voice of the young man who had first spoken broke through her reverie. He was looking at her with an openness that invited her to reciprocate. She hesitated. Opening up felt like an invitation to scrutiny, yet judging by the warmth in his gaze, there was nothing but acceptance waiting on the other side. "I got lost sometimes too," she finally whispered. "I feel like I've spent so much time listening to others, but I rarely allow myself the same sanctuary. My struggle is identifying where I fit in all this, where my voice can be heard." She watched as the subtle shifts on the faces of the others mirrored her own vulnerability. Each pair of eyes held their own stories, her confession encouraging them to acknowledge their vulnerabilities further. Lexi's silence, however, loomed larger than before. Forcing herself to confront Lexi now would take courage she could hardly muster, but something stirred within her. That thread of connection binding them resonated with a familiar thrum of determination. This wasn't merely about Lexi, it was about unleashing every constraint that held her captive in anxiety and self-doubt. "Lexi," she said, her voice shaking slightly with the weight of impending confrontation. "You've led us all in many ways. Your strength is palpable, but what's behind the walls you've built?" A flicker of irritation sparked in Lexi's eyes, quickly quashed by something softer. "Why does it matter? I have a successful career. What can my story offer anyone here?" "Everything," Annie replied firmly, stepping closer. "Your vulnerabilities carry wisdom. The facade you wear isn't just an armor, it's also a barrier. Show us the real you." The room fell into an almost sacred silence. Annie noticed the contours of Lexi's jaw tighten, then relax. For a heartbeat, Annie thought she might see a break in Lexi's composure, an acknowledgement of a struggle, silent but keen. Instead, Lexi's voice emerged barely above a whisper. "You think sharing my truth will change anything?" "Yes," Annie leaned in, matching Lexi's gaze. "It can change everything, not just for you, but for all of us. Look around."
Vulnerability can connect us, show us we are not alone. You don't have to carry that weight alone. Lexi's barriers began to show cracks, an undeniable humanity stepping forward. Annie felt the swell of hope, yet her own inner conflict deepened. What if Lexi never responded to her call? What if facing that rejection meant trampling on the newfound courage she had fostered in others? This weight, this resolve, felt like a looming cliff, terrifying yet exhilarating. Behind her, the chorus of voices began anew, but the promise of unrevealed truths simmered in the air. Annie could feel her connection to them deepening, yet her own moment loomed larger than she anticipated. Could she honestly stand before them all and unravel her hidden story without losing this precious momentum? As Annie stood, teetering between courage and uncertainty, she realized that confronting her hidden self was not just an act of liberation, but a moment of reckoning. Every unspoken fear swirled within her, and the next decision would determine whether she would rise to meet the challenge or retreat once more into shadow. Annie felt like a storm brewing inside, the urgency palpable. The moment of truth had arrived. Would she share her most profound insecurities, allowing her own vulnerability to bridge the chasm she feared? Or would she retreat, and in doing so, steal the light from others? She sensed it in the drumming of her heart. This moment could either illuminate their paths or plunge her back into obscurity. With that realization, Annie understood she stood on the precipice of her own transformation, but would she dare to leap? Annie inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the room settle upon her shoulders. The air felt thick, charged with anticipation as she stood there, a silent hurricane of emotions swirling within. Suddenly, the laughter and stories seemed like echoes from another world, distant and faint. Could she really be the catalyst that brought forth an unvarnished truth? Her heart galloped as she searched for the right words, an anchor in the storm of thoughts that threatened to capsize her resolve. She began, the tremor in her voice betraying her composure. For a fleeting moment, she imagined retreating, finding solace in the shadows of silence. Yet those eyes, those expectant gazes rooted her in place. "I've spent so long hiding," she uttered, each word releasing a fragment of her pent-up fears. "Hiding from my own grief, my doubts, my very existence." She could feel the tension in the room shift, the collective breath held tight as if they were all teetering on the same tipping point. "I lost my mother to illness last year. I thought if I could just keep pushing through life, moving from one day to the next like a machine, it would somehow alleviate the pain," she continued, her voice cracking but gaining strength with each revelation. "But it didn't. It only made the pain worse." The silence thickened, and Annie watched as expressions shifted subtly across their faces. Recognition, empathy, understanding. She could see her vulnerability unlocking something powerful within them. "I thought emotional honesty was a weakness," she admitted, glancing over at Lexi, who seemed momentarily entranced. "But pretending I was fine only buried the truth deeper inside me, like a shadow haunting my steps." Annie sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Perhaps the journey to reveal herself would not be one of isolation, but rather a shared exploration of frailty. It was liberating, yet terrifying, to grasp the impact of her own honesty. As she took a steadying breath, she cast her gaze to Lexi. "You spoke of success as a shield, but I feel it only serves as a reminder of the barriers we construct, not just against the world, but against our own self-acceptance." Lexi's eyebrows knit together, the challenge sparking something beneath her polished exterior. "And what good is it to unearth sadness? It doesn't change the reality of my achievements," she responded sharply, but the edge in her voice faltered. Annie stepped a little closer, her heart fiercely beating, not with fear as before, but with an urgency to connect. "It liberates you. Sharing allows you to be seen rather than merely observed. With every truth laid bare, even the painful ones, we find strength, not just in ourselves, but in those around us." Lexi shifted slightly, a flicker of contemplation crossing her face. Something was slowly unraveling in her, as if each of Annie's words was a thread pulling at the fabric of Lexi's tightly woven existence. The energy in the room buzzed with an unidentifiable tension, the collective anticipation growing. Then a spark ignited with Annie. "Think about it, Lexi. What if I never spoke up? What if none of us did? We'd remain locked in our isolated struggles." As she processed the gravity of her statement, a sense of clarity washed over her. This was not just about her journey, not just about Lexi. It was about collective freedom through shared experiences. She felt an urge to guide them, to unravel the shame woven through their lives, dispelling it layer by layer. "I'm not perfect. I'm flawed and scared," Annie continued, her tone resolute. "But in embracing my truth, I've learned to embrace others, and it's liberating, an act of courage. Can't we break these walls down together?" An unexpected wave of resonance flowed through the group, signaled by subtle nods. For the first time, Annie felt the resolution hardened within her. No longer just a waiting observer, she was ready to lead them through the very vulnerability she once feared. But as she glanced at Lexi, an instinctive tension rose again. Would they all take this daring leap with her? Would they begin to peel back their layers, or would this moment dissolve back into muted silence once more?
Feeling the weight of all eyes upon her, Annie could taste it, the exhilaration and terror intertwining like old friends. What might happen next was a riddle yet unsolved, and the room felt dangerously electric with unspoken possibilities. Before she could ponder further, the gentle hum of voices returned, but restrained, anticipatory, and cautious. They were reaching an intersection of truths, a juncture that could lead to either genuine transformation or reticence cloaked in norm. Will we leap together or retreat into our own narratives? Annie felt the question in her core, knowing it could change everything. And as she waited for an answer, one question loomed larger than all others. What lay on the other side of their shared courage? Annie stood in the charged atmosphere, the weight of her unspoken words still lingering like an uninvited guest. Her heart raced as she searched the faces around her, hoping for a sign that her vulnerability had sparked something. Lexi's tight expression suggested a struggle between the armor of success and the rawness of shared humanity, and Annie felt their gaze locking, a fraught duel of acceptance versus rejection. "Annie," Lexi finally spoke, her voice wavering, "you say this sharing liberates us, but isn't there a risk that we might just unravel even more? What if it backfires?" There it was, the buried fear that Annie herself had grappled with. A part of her wanted to reassure Lexi, to lay down a roadmap to safety, yet another part believed in the chaos of honesty as the only true path. "It's in the unraveling that we learn about ourselves," she replied, each word carefully chosen. "Wrinkles and all, the only way to navigate life is through honesty, even if it hurts." The room hung with a thick silence, as if Annie's audacity had suspended time itself. She had offered them a chance to step into the unknown, an opportunity to confront what lay behind their carefully constructed facades. "Here's how I see it. We exist in a world that adores strength and success, but what happens when we strip it all away? Who are we then?" Lexi shifted uncomfortably on her chair, visibly wrestling with the internal tumult that Annie's words had ignited. Across the room, the others appeared equally pensive, faces reflective, as if they were piecing together definitions of resilience that extended beyond mere triumph. Annie took a deep breath, pushing through the lingering doubt. She had discovered truths about her own grief and flaws, but had they? "I've learned that diving into our pain often brings surprising clarity. It forces us to examine our truths, reshaping how we see ourselves and each other." The group's body language began to shift subtly, arms uncrossed, shoulders relaxed, a faint flicker of courage igniting. They were holding themselves just a little more openly, perhaps searching for an opening, a shared experience that nudged them closer to their own truths. "That's easy to say," one voice piped up from the back. A woman with dark curls framed her face. "But what if speaking up only leaves us more vulnerable? What if our truths are not something we can manage?" Annie's instinct to shield faltered. "Vulnerability sounds like chaos, I know, but I've learned it can bring connection, an anchoring and shared understanding." "I don't want to be seen as weak," Lexi added, crossing her arms again, as though symbolically reapplying the barriers they had begun to dismantle together. "But what if your perceived weakness becomes your strength?" Annie countered, feeling her pulse quicken. "Every time you admit your struggles, you create space for reconciliation, both within yourself and with others." Annie felt a surge of conviction wash over her. Maybe we can redefine what competitiveness looks like. Instead of rage or resentment, we could cultivate empathy and understanding. A quiet murmur resonated across the room, a soft agreement that intertwined with the tension. Annie could feel the threshold before them growing palpable, a choice simmering underfoot. Would they uphold the status quo of superficiality, or transcend it together like a team, raw but genuine? She looked back at each of them, but her gaze momentarily lingered on Lexi, the past version of herself reflected in her hesitant demeanor. "Are we really going to allow fear to dictate our journeys?" Annie asked, feeling audacious again. "Or can we accept that vulnerability, in all its messiness, could drive authentic relationships and transformation?" Annie felt a rise of electricity in the room, rising tension pulled taut by the weight of possibility. Each passing second felt exhilarating yet nerve-wracking, as individuation and connection teetered on the edge of commitment. A hand shot up. It was David,
the quietest of the bunch. If we delve into this together, what's the first step? Where do we even begin? The question hit Annie like a wave. She had wanted to lead without a clear direction, but now faced with an unexpected challenge, she felt the resolve cementing within. Let's start here. What is your truth? What hidden stories shape you, and can we share them? But even as she posed the question, the urgency of the moment surged. Would they rise to this challenge, embracing the complexity of candidness collectively, or shrink back into the comforts of silence and facade? As the group contemplated her words, I could sense the invisible line that separated courage from retreat. The gravity of their choices was palpable, and with each eye locked on her, a question loomed. Who among them would take that brave first step into the raw uncertainty of shared truth? Annie stood in the soft glow of the banquet hall, surrounded by the complex energy shifting around her, a swirl of skepticism, curiosity, and budding transformation.
She felt the weight of the moment pressing against her, the possibility of change hanging in the air like an unspoken agreement. Her earlier bravery had ignited something profound, a spark that not only illuminated her own path, but also began to light the way for others. "Let's strip away the layers," she urged, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the anticipation like a warm knife through butter. "We start by unmasking our truths, embracing the stories that have shaped us. Let today be about authenticity." Her pulse quickened, heart racing as she called for this uncharted vulnerability. David, the quiet observer from the McAllister table, stepped forward hesitantly. Annie noticed his hands tremble as he spoke. "I've always felt like I'm living in my family's shadow. My siblings are brilliant and successful, and I'm just, well, average. I want to do something meaningful, but I don't know how," he confessed, his voice rising with every syllable. The room held its breath. Annie sensed the collective empathy washing over David as his hidden vulnerability rang true. Encouraged, Lexi followed, her defenses wavering under the challenge. "When I present a perfect image, it's a facade. My parents taught me that success was everything. I fear that if I don't meet those expectations, I'll lose myself entirely," she admitted, her eyes glistening with unspent tears. Each admission chipped away at her armor, revealing a glimpse of the individual within the gilded cage of expectation. Annie saw the momentum shift, the commitment solidifying among them. "You see," she said, her heart swelling with recognition of their shared struggles, "we are not so different. Our stories, filled with fears and inadequacies, connect us." She felt their sincerity beckoning her to share more of her journey, to weave her truth into the fabric they were creating together. "I realize now that hiding behind the busyness of life neglected my need for emotional expression," she revealed. The relief was palpable as she surrendered her burdens. "After my mother's death, I became inconsolable, bottling up pain, fearing that exposing my vulnerability would shatter the notion of strength. But instead, it imprisoned me. An unexpected hush settled in the room, the gravity of her honesty laying bare the heart of their gathering. They were no longer just individuals grappling with their own narratives. They were a collective force, confronting the limits of perception and carving out a new meaning of personal worth. As the conversations flowed, Annie noticed breakthroughs happening before her. The woman who had first hesitated earlier suddenly shared her passion for painting, the very facet of her life she had felt compelled to bury under the weight of her corporate job. Laughter mingled with grief, boundaries dissolved, and commonalities flourished. Annie, relieved and fulfilled, felt a sense of freedom enveloping her.
She had not only sparked a transformation within herself, but had also catalyzed a movement that transcended their differences. The party had become an impromptu gathering. Their vulnerabilities connected them, awaking compassion and understanding in ways she could have never anticipated. As the clock ticked on, Annie saw Lexi visibly evolving, her brow unknitting, the tightness around her mouth loosening. I think I've been chasing after a shimmering illusion," Lexi admitted, eyes reflecting a newfound spark of clarity. "Finding my identity in the eyes of others, rather than recognizing it within myself. I've been afraid to be seen in my imperfections." The vigor surged through her, an overarching reminder that they were all in this together, a mosaic of shared experiences piecing them back together. Annie felt humbled witnessing how their narratives resonated, creating an unexpected tapestry of growth woven from truth spoken. Finally, as the night reached its crescendo, Annie scanned the room, a setting once rife with judgment, now adorned with acceptance and understanding, an insistent knowing anchored within her heart. She had taken ownership of her voice and empowered others to do the same.
With a lower voice, a triumphant whisper that sent ripples through the crowd, she concluded, "This is just the beginning of our stories. Let's continue having the conversations that matter. Let's promise to keep breaking down barriers." Eyes glistening with gratitude responded in silent unison, a pact formed through the transformative nature of shared vulnerabilities. Annie stepped back slightly, allowing herself to breathe, to revel in the collective triumph, no longer just a waitress buried under the weight of expectation, but an artist, a mother, and now a renewed beacon of strength for others. She had forged a space where complexity found acceptance, vulnerability became a strength, and authenticity thrived. Finally, as the applause rang out in celebration of their collective courage, Annie felt a solid confidence enveloping her. She had achieved growth beyond her dreams. She had proven her worth not just in reclaiming her narrative, but in unearthing the beauty that lay dormant within others. This was the conclusion she had longed for, the moment she had stepped into her identity resolutely, and it revealed a world filled with infinite possibilities. In that light, she understood precisely what it meant to be both an individual and part of something greater. Annie was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Now, you need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories that can inspire your transformation. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and ensure these stories reach others needing hope. Comment your reactions and theories about this ending that captures the essence of personal overcoming.
And share this video instantly with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to share the power of change. This is the moment to show your support and transform lives together.